Welcome to the T. Allen Haynes Radio Show. Conversations with elite business leaders from around the world. And now, here is your host, T. Allen Haynes.
All right, welcome back to the show. We've got a great guest for you today. We have Dr. Nekeshia Hammond, and she's a psychologist, speaker, author, and owner of Hammond Psychology Associates. She is the 2017 president of the Florida Psychological Association, and she also serves on the board of directors for the Ryan Nece Foundation. Dr. Hammond is honored to consult with the media to increase public education about mental health issues, and she's been featured on NBC, ABC, CBS, as well as various magazines and radio shows throughout the country. She's the author of A Practical Guide to Raising Emotional Healthy Children to help parents on their journey to improve the lives of their children. Dr. Hammond, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
It's awesome to have you, and we're really excited to have the content that you're going to provide for our listeners. So let's just get right into it. How did you get started in doing what you're doing?
So I actually got started back in 2009 is when I began my private practice, serving particularly children and families. And I still remember back then, almost 9 years ago, just how scary it was to kind of branch out and start a business. But that's when we got started, and luckily with the help of many workshops and mentors and, a lot of business-savvy individuals, we were able to really start that practice and make an impact in the community and with the families that we serve.
Awesome. So exactly what type of clients are you helping? I mean, what is your specialty?
So our specialty is children and families, and specifically what I do is I do evaluations to really look at what is going on with children and teens, because what I've found is, especially in the age of the overdiagnosis with ADHD, people quickly look at children, they take 5 minutes and they're like, yes, they have ADHD, which really may or may not be the case. So what I do is I spend hours with this child looking at socially how they're doing, emotionally how they're doing, learning. Is there a learning disability? Is there something else going on? Because really what looks like ADHD could be about 25 other things. So what I love about the evaluations I do is I really do an assessment to say, okay, yes, this child does have ADHD, and here's what to do about it. Or actually, no, they do not have ADHD. Here's what else is really going on. And then provide a roadmap and some treatment guidelines for parents for things that they can do at home, or if there's further interventions that are needed, to go over that with the parents.
Interesting. I mean, they labeled me as a daydreamer when I was growing up. I mean, is there a connection there, or did they just decide that, when they come up with this ADD, or is there really some basis to it?
Yeah, I definitely think there's a basis to it for sure. And what happened, like you mentioned, and I remember too, as a child, there's maybe children in the class, and what happened, well, I'll say back then, when we were kids, is that children were just labeled as bad, or they weren't learning, or they're lazy, or there were all these labels that were put on children that really were displaying ADHD symptoms. Now that we have a name for it, the unfortunate part of it is that there's too many children just with that label thrown around. But there's a lot of statistical or scientific studies that do show ADHD symptoms and where it sort of comes from. But the positive of identifying children with ADHD who truly do have ADHD is that now we know how to help these children, which is, it literally can change someone's life when we get to that point of knowing what it is that's going on with the child and how to help them.
Nice. So did you always want to be a doctor?
I did. So at the age of 7, I decided I really wanted to be a doctor. However, at that time, I thought that I wanted to be a pediatrician because I obviously knew what a pediatrician was. I was going to a pediatrician as a little girl, but it wasn't really until I went to college and I learned what a psychologist was, which was so fascinating to me, and just the idea that there's so much intervention that you can do, especially for children. I am not saying that you can't help an 85-year-old person. I know you can, but for me, it's so exciting that a 5 or 10 or 15-year-old, that the interventions we do now in their childhood years could literally impact their life and just completely change their path on life. So that just became so exciting to me when I learned about that in college. And then, obviously from that point, just learning what it would take to be a psychologist and to help children and families have a completely different positive outlook on life.
So along the way, was there a book that influenced you to help you where you're at today?
Yes, there was. Oh my gosh. And it was, I read it a while back, but The Success Principles by Jack Canfield is, still to this day, it's the best book. It's a very thick book. So it's not a, quick read, if you will. It's a very thick book, but it has so many concrete principles of how to be successful, how to find what you're meant to do, your purpose, and really how to implement them. I like very practical books. So there's a lot of, things to try and ways to keep yourself motivated, because especially being, I think, maybe people listening to this can relate that are in their own business or have side businesses. You have to motivate yourself. So that book was just really amazing to learn the self-motivation to really, try to be as successful as you can. So I really would highly recommend that book for anyone that hasn't read it, The Success Principles.
Yeah, that's in my top 5 as well. It's a great book.
Yeah.
I've been around you for a little bit, and I know your passion, but what makes you get up in the morning, do what you do to help the people that you help?
I think that one of the things that what really gets me up in the morning and excites me is that I always believe that children need a voice. And sometimes I've seen so many children in so many different settings throughout my career and in the community service I do. And for children, they don't necessarily always have a voice. I think in particular in this country, they're not always heard. So having the opportunity to basically advocate for children and for families that maybe they don't have the resources or maybe they don't have the information that they need to get on the right path with their family is something that has, still to this day, is just so exciting for me. And I've also done a lot of community service and service projects throughout the country and out of the country as well. And it's the same thing. Like, it's so exciting because, like, the opportunity to give children and families a voice and the opportunity to advocate is just, it's very exciting. So that definitely gets me out of bed in the morning.
Awesome. What would you say would be, people are given so much information these days, but what do you find to be the biggest misconception about ADD and ADHD?
Yeah, there's many. But one of the biggest misconceptions is that there's this idea that children with ADHD somehow are just very hyperactive, they always have behavior problems, and they're not going to be successful. And that is the farthest thing from the truth, because I have, again, almost 9 years in private practice seen so many children that generally do have ADHD, and so many children that I've met are very bright, they're very smart, they're very talented, they have amazing supportive parents, and they're going to be very successful. But the only difference is that there's just a bit of intervention and things that need to be changed in the school setting, things that need to be changed at home, just minor changes that need to happen to make them more successful, but it doesn't mean that they're not going to be successful. And I think because of the stigma of mental health that's out there, either parents are afraid, understandably because we have a stigma, but afraid to get their children help, or just this idea that, oh my God, they have an ADHD diagnosis, they're doomed for life, which is not true. So those are really some of the biggest misconceptions that I have seen.
I mean, what are you finding that, what is the root of this? Is this the environment, or is it too much McDonald's, or, what is the underlying cause of some of these symptoms?
Yeah. And what I have seen a lot of is a lot of it is environmental, because what will happen, it is mind-blowing to me, and I've seen this over and over and over, is that, well, first of all, let's say a child is diagnosed with ADHD. Once there are things that the schools can put into place, there's something called a 504 plan or individualized education plan, but there are things that the schools can put in place to help children with ADHD, and it is like night and day, and I've seen it over and over. There's things that parents can do at home once they understand, you know what, basically your child thinks differently. That's it. It doesn't necessarily mean a negative things, but there's things to change at home and implementing more structure and ways to approach children that have ADHD, which helps tremendously. In the beginning of my career, I used to do more intervention and therapy, and even through that process, teaching children how to have the self-control, the impulse control, social skills, and those type of skills that they can learn can completely change their life. So definitely I've seen a lot of environmental factors. Research does show, though, there are also genetic factors and really a combination of things, but it's not caused by poor parenting. That's actually a myth, but more so that there are environmental things that can be changed that can help children that have ADHD.
Is there a connection here with bullying as well?
Oh, definitely. Such a connection, unfortunately. And I've talked a lot about that topic on many other radio shows too, bullying. And what I've seen, and the research definitely shows, is children that have a mental health condition such as ADHD do tend to get bullied more, because sometimes there's a social skill issue where, a child may blurt out something they're not supposed to blurt out, or have a hard time when, a friend doesn't want to play anymore and they still want to play, or, something like that. And unfortunately, children with ADHD tend to be bullied more. So as you can imagine, for any child that's a victim of bullying, that sometimes can cause more behavior problems as well. So there's a lot of different factors that really impact children with ADHD. So that's why I love advocating for children, because, like I said, they just need so desperately that voice and the help to get them on the right track.
So could you share with us you don't have to mention any names, but a case study, so to speak, on how somebody came to you and you helped them overcome these challenges?
Yeah. So, and again, obviously without mentioning names, I recently had an 8-year-old that basically honestly was having a hard time with bullying in school. And what happened was, through the evaluation we did, we actually determined 2 things. One was that this child did have, true ADHD by the testing that was done, but they also had a learning disability, which was not yet identified. So one of the things that we did was really to do that assessment, make sure that the school, did what they were supposed to do as far as getting the appropriate modifications, sitting closer, to the teacher, and extra time on their task and things like that, especially with the learning side too. And one of the benefits was that no one even knew that there was ADHD and learning disabilities. And instead, the child, as I mentioned, was being bullied and really sort of labeled by their teacher as lazy, not wanting to do their work, they're just not listening, but really to establish that there were conditions that needed to be addressed in the school was very, very life-changing for this individual. So, and obviously exciting for their parents as well, just to start to get the help that they needed in school.
So were there specific steps that they took to overcome this challenge?
They did. They approached their school. So what I do is, after the evaluation, it's, like I said, a pretty long process, but after the evaluation, I have a report, and that report was something that they took into the school to say, hey, I just received this psychological evaluation. Here are the results. I need to take the next steps. And then what happened after that is the school proceeded to work on a what's called an IEP, and to put into place modifications basically for the curriculum because of the learning disability, because of the ADHD, and changing the environment for that child to be more successful. in the school setting. So once they took that route, in particular at school, that definitely helped quite a bit for their family.
Interesting. What would you say would be the first thing that the listener should do if they're facing these challenges, or they have someone in their family that has this challenge?
Yeah, the first step I often recommend, if a family is concerned that their child may have ADHD, really the first step is to go to their pediatrician or their family physician and to make sure that there are no medical issues going on, because that's another thing that I've seen with some of the patients that I've served. Sometimes it's not ADHD and it's a vitamin deficiency or anemia or blood sugar issue, or there's a whole slew of other medical conditions that look like ADHD. So that should definitely be the first step, to go to their physician, get the appropriate blood work, make sure they're okay in that respect. After that, provided there's no issues medically, physically going on, the next step I would definitely recommend a psychological evaluation to really, like I mentioned before, look at socially, emotionally, and intellectually, and all these parts to a child to see what is going on, what are their strengths and weaknesses, and at that point to learn how you can best help your child.
So some of the listeners might be concerned about taking those steps because of the stigma. Do you have anything that you can share with them that could alleviate that?
I do. And of course, over the years, I've definitely heard those concerns as well. Parents saying, I feel uncomfortable being here because my fill in the blank, my mother or my sister or my neighbor or whomever doesn't believe in psychology or doesn't believe in ADHD or any of those things. And what I say is that it is, first of all, the session is completely confidential by law, with a few exceptions. So I'm not going to tell anyone that, they're obviously getting the help that they need. So if that is the point where you're at, I completely understand the stigma in this country. And for anyone listening, if you're at the point where you have to decide to do what is best for your child versus upsetting someone else that doesn't agree with your path, I say go in, get the help that you need, and don't tell anyone, frankly, because you're doing the best for your child, and that's what's important. And I've had many people that have said, I don't want anyone to know I'm here. That's fine. It's a confidential process. And once a parent does get that evaluation report, it's confidential, so they can decide whether or not they want to take it to the school, share it with their family, friends, or not tell anyone at all. But at least they take the first step. That is so important, to take that first step. And one other thing I want to recommend quickly, too, is sometimes it is hard for parents to, like you said, to pick up the phone and call a psychologist because it's scary, and I get that. So go to the pediatrician then. Take that step because it's a little less scary, and then get the recommendations you need to get the help for your child. But definitely reach out.
Wow, doctor, that's great. That's great information. So the listeners are probably wondering how they can reach out to you to find out more, or how you can possibly help them. What would be the best way for them to do that?
So the best way would be for them to reach out at hammondpsychology.com, and it has all my information on there, as well as all my social media links. I am most often on Twitter at dr_Hammond, and there's some other social media that's all on the website.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for being on the show today. We really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. Well, there you have it for this edition of the show. We'll see you the next time.
Thanks for listening to the T. Allen Haynes Radio Show with T. Allen Haynes. Conversations with elite business leaders from around the world. We will see you next time on the T. Allen Haynes Radio Show.